Samuel Keene stood at the altar beside the largest woman he had ever seen, knowing he had just traded his pride for a single cow. But when she locked the bedroom door that night and whispered, "My name isn't Clara Hensley, and Virgil Carr isn't my father," Samuel realized he'd walked into a trap far deadlier than debt. In that moment, the drought, the dying cattle, the bank's threats, all of it meant nothing compared to the danger standing in front of him. Follow my story to the very end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far this story travels. The church smelled of dust and old pine, the kind that creaked under boots no matter how softly you stepped. Samuel Keene shifted uncomfortably, his collar itching against the starched shirt he'd borrowed from his neighbor. Across from him stood Clara Hensley, broad-shouldered, the seams of her brown dress straining black hair, pulled back so tight it looked painful. The preacher's voice droned on in a slow, solemn drawl, but Samuel's mind was elsewhere. His eyes wandered to the open doorway and to the thought gnawing at him harder than hunger. That cow better still be in Carr's barn. Virgil Carr leaned casually against the side wall, a smirk playing across his lips, gold-capped teeth glinting whenever the sunlight caught them. He'd made the offer just 2 nights before in Murphy's saloon, the smell of whiskey and stale smoke thick between them. "Marry my daughter Clara, and you'll get the finest Holstein breeding cow in the county," Carr had said, swirling his glass. Samuel stared into his own empty one. "Why me? Because you're broke, son," Carr said with a grin. "And you're too proud to beg." Pride. Samuel had carried plenty of it right up until the drought sucked the life from his land. 3 months without rain, and his once thriving herd of 100 had withered to bones baking in the sun. The foreclosure notice in his pocket was a ticking clock. The preacher's tone shifted. It was time for the vows. "I do," Clara said, her voice deeper than he expected, firm and unshaking. Samuel hesitated just long enough for whispers to stir in the pews before forcing the words out. "I do." The ring bit into her skin, too small for her thick fingers. She forced it on without wincing, then looked him dead in the eyes. There was no shyness there, no uncertainty, only something sharp, like she knew a secret he didn't. The reception was over almost before it began. Carr's ranch hands shoveled food into their mouths and left without a word. Neighbors murmured in low tones, casting glances that felt more like pity than celebration. Samuel shook hands mechanically, like a man being mourned rather than married. Clara gathered her belongings, just a single worn carpet bag and a leather-bound book she clutched tight. She didn't need help climbing into the wagon, though the springs groaned under her weight. Samuel flicked the reins, and the wagon rattled down the dirt road toward his ranch. Coyotes howled somewhere in the distance, the only sound breaking the long, heavy silence. Halfway home, he tried. "You read much?" he asked, nodding at the book. She didn't look at him. Enough. When they reached the cabin, the sun was slipping behind the hills, bleeding the sky red and gold. Samuel hauled her bag inside, expecting awkward small talk and a slow negotiation over how to share the space. Instead, she walked straight past him down the narrow hall and into the bedroom. He followed, frowning. "Clara, we click." The key turned in the lock. She moved to the window, yanked the curtain shut, and turned to face him. Her voice was steady, but her eyes, those sharp, knowing eyes, held him like a lasso. "Sit down," she said. Samuel's grip tightened on the doorknob. "What's this about?" "My name isn't Clara Hensley," she said flatly, "and Virgil Carr isn't my father." The words hit like a fist to the ribs. "What did you just say?" She stepped closer, unfastened the carpet bag, and pulled out a thick roll of papers. "The real Clara died 2 years ago. Carr paid me to take her place. But not for the reason you think." Samuel didn't like the way she said reason. Not one bit. And in that dim candle-lit room with the smell of dust and wood smoke hanging heavy, Samuel Keene realized this marriage had nothing to do with a cow and everything to do with a war he didn't even know he'd joined. Samuel didn't move at first. The words sat heavy in the air, the only sound the faint hiss of the candle wick. Her stare didn't break, and he could see now there was nothing soft about it. "I don't understand," he said slowly. "If you're not Carr's daughter, then who the hell are you?" "My name is Margaret Doyle," she said. "And I didn't come here for you. I came here for him." The way she said him made Samuel's gut tighten. She walked to the small table in the corner, rolled out the bundle of papers, and began spreading them one by one. Ledger pages, notarized statements, names scrawled in uneven handwriting. That's the original water rights contract for Copper Creek, she explained. My father owned it. 3 years ago, Virgil Carr murdered him and made it look like a riding accident. Then he forged the transfer. Samuel stared at the pages, the ink faded but legible. That's a hell of an accusation. It's not an accusation, she said. It's the truth. And I can prove it. She tapped a finger on a witness statement. 2 ranch hands saw him tamper with my father's saddle. They were too scared to talk then. They aren't anymore. Samuel leaned back against the wall. So you put on a dress, stood at an altar, and said vows just to get close to him. You could have gone to the marshal. Her mouth twisted in something between a smile and a grimace. The territorial marshal. The one he's been paying off for years. You think he'd take my statement and not sell me to Carr before sundown? He couldn't argue. He'd seen enough to know the reach of men like Carr went further than the county line. Still, something didn't sit right. So why marry me? What do I have to do with this? You have something he doesn't, she said. Desperation. Carr thinks you're a broken man willing to take his scraps. That makes you invisible to him. And tonight, while he's celebrating marrying off his daughter, he'll be at Murphy's, drinking, vulnerable. Samuel felt his jaw tighten. You're planning to kill him. I'm planning to end him. She reached into her carpetbag again and pulled out a small glass vial, the liquid inside clear as rainwater. He almost laughed. Poison. Her gaze didn't waver, fast and clean. And when they find his body, they'll think his problem daughter finally took matters into her own hands. Samuel's eyes narrowed. That daughter being you, that daughter being whoever they think I am. Either way, I'll be gone before they start asking questions. He stepped away from the door and took a long look at her. You've put a lot of thought into this. 3 years' worth, she said. I've lived every day with the memory of my father lying broken in the dirt, and every night wondering why the man who killed him was still breathing. Samuel crossed the room, took the vial from her hand, and held it up to the light. You should know something about this. She frowned. What? It's not poison. The disbelief on her face was almost comical. Don't lie to me. I'm not. It's salt water. The medicine man who sold it to you works for me. Her fingers clenched at her sides. Why? Because I've been hunting. Carr, too, Samuel said. Only I don't plan on letting him off easy. I want him alive long enough to watch everything he built turn to dust. I want him bankrupt, disgraced, and rotting in a cell. She took a step toward him, her voice sharp. You think the law's going to do that? He owns half the county. Not for long, Samuel said. I've been gathering evidence for months, bank records, witness statements, cattle brand forgeries. The federal marshal's already on his way. He'll be here tomorrow morning with warrants. For the first time, Margaret's expression faltered. You've been planning this without telling anyone. I learned the hard way that the fewer people who know, the better. He set the vial down on the table. If you kill him tonight, the only thing you'll get is a rope around your neck, and maybe around mine too, since we're conveniently married now. The candle flickered in the draft, throwing shadows across her face. So would I just sit here while you play hero? You stay alive, Samuel said. That's the smartest move either of us can make. She didn't answer right away, just stared at the papers spread across the table. The silence stretched until the faint sound of horses broke it, a low rhythmic thunder rolling closer. Samuel's eyes snapped to the window. Margaret moved beside him. You expecting someone? No. The sound grew louder, joined by the glint of torchlight weaving through the darkness. Samuel's stomach sank. Carr's men, he muttered. She grabbed his arm. How could they know? He was already moving to the bed, pulling out the rifle from beneath it. Somebody talked. Could have been the preacher. Carr owns him too. What do we do? She asked, her voice tight. There's a root cellar under the kitchen floorboards. Take the papers and hide. No matter what you hear, don't come out until morning. And I'll give them what they came for. Margaret hesitated, then snatched the papers, holding them to her chest. Samuel, they'll kill you. Maybe he said, loading the rifle. But I'm not running, not from him. The pounding of hooves was close now, the torchlight spilling into the yard. A voice Samuel knew too well boomed through the night. Samuel Keene. Come on out. Margaret's eyes met his one last time before she turned and hurried toward the kitchen. He waited until he heard the sill in hand as the dark yard filled with firelight and the shadows of armed men. Samuel stayed low by the window, the rifle warm in his hands, the smell of gun oil mixing with the cold night air drifting through the cracks in the wall. Outside, the torchlight cast wild shadows across the yard, stretching and shrinking with every sway of the rider's arms. Virgil Carr was at the front, sitting high in his saddle, like a man who believed the world bent for him. The gold teeth caught the firelight flashing each time he grinned. Beside him rode the territorial marshal badge, glinting under the torch's orange glow. Samuel's gut tightened. The marshal was supposed to be the one bringing Carr in. Now standing shoulder to shoulder with him, it was clear he'd been bought. Keen Carr's voice cracked the night. "I know what you've been up to. Come out now and maybe I'll let you live long enough to hang in town." Samuel eased the window open just enough to speak. "Evening, Virgil. Congratulations on the wedding. Your daughter's quite something." Carr barked a laugh deep and ugly. "That's not my daughter, and you know it." "Where's Margaret Doyle?" "Never heard of her. My wife's in bed. Long day, you understand." The marshal stepped forward, his horse's hooves kicking up dust. "We know she killed the real Clara Hensley 2 years ago. We know she planned to poison Mr. Carr tonight, and we know you've been helping her." The lie hit Samuel like a cold slap, but his face stayed calm. "You've been busy inventing stories." Carr leaned forward in his saddle rifle resting across his arm. "No need for stories, Keen. I own this territory. Every move you've made, I've known about it. You really think you could outsmart me?" Samuel didn't answer right away. His eyes scanned the men flanking Carr, 6 riders in total, all armed, all looking like they'd be happy to spill his blood in the dirt. But there was something Carr didn't know, and Samuel was about to use it. "You made one mistake, Virgil," he said quietly. "Oh, what's that?" "You assumed I'd fight fair." Before Carr could reply, Samuel's rifle came up, not aimed at him, but at the torch in his hand. The shot cracked through the night, and the torch burst apart, sending burning oil splattering across Carr's coat. Flames licked up his chest and shoulder, and he shouted, beating at them with his hat. In the chaos, the other torches wavered, throwing the yard into half-darkness. Samuel dove behind the water trough, the wood cold and wet against his back. "Get him," the marshal roared. Boots hit the dirt rifles, clattering as men dismounted. Samuel took another shot, not to kill, but to send a warning round into the dirt at their feet. The smell of burnt fabric and horse sweat filled the air. Then from beyond the ridge came another sound, the thunder of more hooves, faster, heavier. Samuel risked a glance toward the road. Lantern light bobbed in the distance, closing fast. Carr's men hesitated, unsure if the newcomers were friend or foe. Carr cursed, still swatting at his smoldering coat. The marshal barked, "Hold your ground!" The riders crested the ridge, and the moonlight flashed across polished badges. Federal deputies, 6 of them, rode hard into the yard, flanking a tall black man in a wide-brimmed hat. His voice carried like a rifle shot. "Drop your weapons. This is a federal investigation." Carr's men faltered. The deputies swung down, rifles drawn. The territorial marshal's face went pale, but his hand still inched toward his revolver. Samuel saw it coming and fired the bullet, hitting the ground just in front of his boot. The tall man strode forward. "Marshal Reeves." "United States Federal Marshal, Mr. Carr. You are under arrest for murder, theft, fraud, and conspiracy." Carr froze, chest-heaving eyes darting between Reeves and Samuel. "This is a setup," he snarled. A new voice cut through the night, steady, clear, and all too familiar to Samuel. "It is. And you walked right into it." Margaret stepped out from the shadows of the cabin, a lantern in one hand, the bundle of papers in the other. Her face was calm, almost cold as she crossed the yard. "I've been working with federal investigators for 3 months. Every bribe, every threat, every forged paper, you've been watched the whole time." Samuel blinked. She'd never gone into the cellar. She'd been signaling Reeves from the kitchen window the moment Carr's men arrived. Carr's jaw worked, but no words came. The marshal beside him finally moved for his gun, but Reeves's deputy was faster, wrenching it away. Carr glared at Margaret. "And what about the real Clara?" "You kill her too." Margaret's grip tightened on the lantern. "Clara was my sister. She found out what you did to our father. She threatened to go to the law, and you poisoned her. Tonight was for her, and for every life you've ruined. The federal deputies swarmed shackling Carr and the corrupt marshal. Samuel stepped from behind the trough, lowering his rifle. The fire in Carr's coat was out now, but his arrogance was gone with it. Even with the danger passing, Samuel's pulse stayed high. He watched Margaret in the torchlight, the truth of who she was finally laid bare. She'd lied to him, used him, dragged him into a storm, but she'd also outplayed a man who'd bled the county dry for years. Reeves glanced at Samuel. "We'll be hauling them to the Capitol in the morning. You've done this territory a service." Samuel didn't answer. His eyes stayed on Margaret. She met his stare without flinching, but there was something new there, something he couldn't name yet. The yard smelled of smoke and gunpowder. Horses shifted nervously. Somewhere beyond the ridge, a coyote howled long and low. And in that uneasy quiet, Samuel understood one thing. Carr's reign was ending, but the fight for the land, for survival, maybe even for trust, was far from over. The metallic snap of the shackles closing around Virgil Carr's wrists still hung in the air when Marshal Reeves gave a short nod to his deputies. They began leading the prisoners toward the road, lantern light bobbing against the darkness. Samuel stood still, his rifle lowered but not put away, watching Carr's silhouette shrink against the horizon. The man's shoulders were hunched now, stripped of the swagger he'd worn like armor for years. Margaret moved past Samuel without a word, the bundle of papers clutched tightly under her arm. He turned toward her. "You could have told me," he said quietly. She didn't stop walking. "You would have tried to stop me." "I damn well would have tried to prepare," he replied, matching her pace toward the cabin. The smell of smoke and gunpowder still lingered in the night air, mixing with the faint scent of her lantern oil. Inside, she set the papers down on the table, her fingers lingering on them as though they might vanish if she let go. Samuel leaned the rifle against the wall. "So you've been working with Reeves all this time?" Margaret turned her eyes sharp but tired. 3 months. He needed someone on the inside who could get close to Carr without tipping him off. "You were the perfect cover." "Perfect cover." Samuel's voice carried an edge. "You made me look like a desperate fool willing to marry for a cow." "That's a hell of a cover, Margaret." Her jaw tightened. "It worked, didn't it?" He looked at her for a long moment, then glanced at the papers. "So that's it. Carr goes to prison, and you ride out of here." She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she walked to the small kitchen, poured water into a tin cup, and took a slow sip. "The drought's still here," she said finally. "Carr may be gone, but the land's dying. That cow he promised you isn't going to save your ranch." Samuel gave a humorless laugh. "You think I don't know that?" He stepped closer, his voice low. "I've been fighting to keep this place alive since before you showed up. Now Carr's gone, but his men still own land, still control the water. Reeves will take him, but the rest of them will circle like buzzards." Margaret set the cup down and met his gaze. "Then we make sure they have nothing to circle." He studied her, unsure if she was proposing survival or war. Before he could ask, hoofbeats sounded again, slower this time, but steady. Samuel moved to the window, parting the curtain just enough to see Reeves riding back into the yard. The marshal dismounted, tying his horse to the post before stepping onto the porch. Samuel opened the door. Reeves got straight to the point. "Carr's being transported at first light, but I can't spare men to keep watch here. You need to be ready. His people might try to burn you out tonight." Margaret stepped forward. "You think they'd come after us with him in custody? They'll think you've got more evidence than you've shown," Reeves said, "and they'd be right, wouldn't they?" His eyes flicked to the bundle of papers on the table. Samuel answered for her. "We can handle ourselves." Reeves studied them both for a long beat. "You'd better, and if anything happens, keep those documents safe. They're worth more than land or cattle right now. They're the noose for every man still loyal to Carr." When Reeves left, the sound of his horse's hooves faded into the night until it was just the two of them again. Samuel shut the door and turned to Margaret. "So still planning to ride out?" She didn't flinch. "No, not yet." Something in his chest tightened, though he wasn't sure why. "Then we make a plan." They worked in near silence, Samuel checking his rifle and revolver while Margaret went through the papers, sorting them into neat stacks. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying the dry, electric smell of dust before a storm that would never come. Hours passed. Samuel lit a second candle as midnight neared. Margaret glanced up from the table. "You never told me why you hate Carr so much." He looked up from cleaning the rifle barrel. He bought my debt from the bank foreclosed early and had his men steal my herd in the night. That cow he offered as a dowry? It was mine before the drought. Her eyes softened slightly. Then maybe we're not so different after all. Before he could reply, the horses came. No shouting this time, no torches, just the soft, deliberate rhythm of hooves and the faint jingle of tack. Samuel moved to the window again, heart thudding. He counted 3 riders moving through the darkness, stopping just short of the yard. Margaret rose quietly, gathering the papers into her bag. Reeves was right. Samuel checked the rifle one last time. If they want a fight, they'll get one. The riders dismounted. The sound of boots on dry dirt carried in the stillness. Then came a voice low, unfamiliar, and too calm. Keen. Doyle. We're not here for you. We're here for what you've got. Margaret's grip tightened on the bag. Samuel stepped to the door, his voice hard. You'll leave with nothing. There was a pause outside, the kind that said the next move would decide everything. And Samuel knew if he opened that door, the night would end in blood. The voice outside was steady, but it carried a weight Samuel didn't like. Men who spoke that calm in the dark were either desperate or very sure of themselves. He could hear the horses shifting, leather creaking as reins were drawn tighter. Margaret moved closer, her eyes flicking to the window. 3 of them, she whispered. Not Carr's men. That makes them no safer, Samuel said. He didn't take his eyes off the door. What is it you think we've got? He called out. There was a low chuckle from the yard. Evidence, names, enough to make a lot of powerful men very nervous. We'll take it, and you 2 can keep breathing. Margaret's voice cut sharp through the air. You're working for the ones Carr answered to. Silence for a beat. Then, we work for whoever pays. Samuel glanced at her, his grip tightening on the rifle. Go to the back room. If they push in, you take the bag and run out the back. I'm not running, she said. He turned his head, meeting her stare. I'm not asking. But Margaret didn't move. She stepped to the table instead, set the bag down, and undid the clasp. If they want proof, she murmured, maybe we give them something else. Outside, the footsteps drew closer. Boots on the porch now, the boards groaning under the weight. The knob rattled once. Last chance, Keen. Hand it over. Samuel swung the door open himself, catching the men mid-step. The first stood taller than the others, hat brim low, a revolver, already in hand. The 2 behind him carried rifles. None wore badges. You're trespassing, Samuel said, the barrel of his rifle already aimed. The tall one's smile was humorless. And you're outnumbered. Maybe Samuel replied, but you're still standing in the open. For a second, no one moved. Then Margaret spoke from behind him. You want names. You want proof. Come get it. The leader's eyes shifted past Samuel to her. That flicker was all Samuel needed. He stepped sideways, quick and clean, and brought the butt of his rifle up hard into the man's gun hand. The revolver clattered to the porch. Margaret kicked it back into the cabin before the others could react. The 2 with rifles started to raise them, but Samuel was already moving. He fired once, the shot chewing into the porch rail, inches from the nearest man's chest. Both froze, not eager to test his aim. You think you can hold us off all night? The leader growled, cradling his hand. I only need to hold you off until Reeves gets back, Samuel said. That drew a laugh, but not from the leader, from one of the riflemen. Reeves ain't coming back. He's riding hard for the capital. You're on your own. Margaret's gaze sharpened. Then you don't know Reeves like I do. The men hesitated just enough for Samuel to see they weren't here to trade shots. They were here to intimidate, maybe snatch the bag and disappear into the night. But the moment they stepped over the threshold, there'd be no going back. You've got till I count to 3, Samuel said, voice low. Then you walk away empty-handed, or you crawl away full of lead. 1, he started, his finger resting light on the trigger. The tall one's jaw tightened. This isn't over. 2. Boots scraped against the porch boards. The leader backed down the steps first, the other 2 following with slow, deliberate movements. By the time Samuel reached 3, they were already mounting up. He didn't lower the rifle until the sound of their horses faded into the dark. Margaret exhaled tension slipping from her shoulders. You just made enemies with more than Carr's men. I had them already, Samuel said, closing the door and sliding the bolt. Now they just know my face. She moved to the table and began packing the papers again. They'll be back, and they won't knock next time. He nodded, crossing to the window to watch the road. Then we make sure when they do, we're ready. Margaret looked at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. You didn't have to open that door. You could have let them try and force it had the advantage. Samuel's gaze stayed on the night beyond the glass. I've seen what happens when you wait for trouble to come through the door. It never ends clean. The room was quiet after that, save for the soft scrape of her stacking the documents. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying with it a faint whiff of rain, but the sky stayed empty. No clouds, no mercy. Margaret finally broke the silence. When this is over, when Carr's gone, and his men are scattered, what then? Samuel turned from the window, meeting her eyes. Then we see if there's anything left worth rebuilding. Neither said more. The candles burned low, the shadows deepened, and the ranch seemed to hold its breath, waiting for whatever would come next. The night seemed to settle again after the riders disappeared, but Samuel knew better. Quiet in these parts was never trustworthy. It was the kind that made men grip their rifles tighter, not loosen their hands. The lantern on the table flickered low shadows stretching across Margaret's face as she tied the bag of documents shut. They'll tell someone, she said, her voice low but steady. And whoever they tell will be worse. Samuel leaned the rifle against the wall but didn't sit. Worse has been at my door before. She studied him a moment. You've been living like this a long time, haven't you? He didn't answer right away, his eyes on the window scanning the darkness. Long enough to know it's never just one fight. You win, one another comes. Different faces, same game. Margaret closed the bag and slid it toward her side of the table. That's why I can't just ride out now. Carr was part of something bigger. Reeves might not have the manpower to clean it all up. He turned toward her, leaning on the chair back. You planning on becoming a deputy now? Her lips curved, but it wasn't amusement. I'm planning on making sure no one else ends up like my father. Or your herd. For a moment, Samuel almost told her she didn't know what she was getting into, but he could see in her eyes she'd already been in it far longer than most men lasted. A sudden sound outside snapped both their heads toward the door, a single sharp crack in the night. Not a gunshot. Wood splitting. Samuel moved to the door, motioning her back. He eased it open just enough to peer into the yard. Near the fence line, one of the posts had snapped clean through the rails, sagging toward the dirt. In the moonlight, he caught movement shadows slipping along the fence, low and fast. Not riders, he murmured. Margaret was beside him now. Then what? Before she could finish, a figure darted forward, tossing something toward the cabin. Samuel slammed the door just as glass shattered against it. A sharp, acrid smell hit them instantly, stinging the back of his throat. Lamp oil, he said, grabbing the nearest blanket and shoving it against the bottom of the door. Margaret's eyes widened. They're going to burn us out. He moved quickly, pulling the blanket tight to keep the fumes from creeping inside. Get the bag and move to the back. She hesitated, watching him grab the second rifle. What about you? I'll make sure they don't light another one. Outside, faint footsteps shifted through the dirt. Samuel stepped to the window, lifting the rifle. He caught sight of a man crouched near the woodpile, fumbling with a lantern. Samuel's shot rang out, and the man yelped, stumbling back into the shadows. Two more, Margaret called from the back room, her voice low but tense. They're circling wide. Samuel didn't have time to think. He moved to the back door, threw it open, and stepped onto the porch. The night was cold, the air sharp in his lungs. He saw one of the men in the field, a small, dark shape against the pale dust lantern in hand. Samuel fired again, hitting the lantern dead on. Flames burst and died in the same breath, scattering sparks harmlessly into the dirt. The third man was closer, rushing toward the side of the cabin with something clutched in his hand. Samuel swung the rifle, but felt a jolt of pain rip through his shoulder as the man's thrown stone struck home. He gritted his teeth, steadied his aim, and fired. The man spun and dropped the object, clattering from his hand. Margaret appeared in the doorway, bag slung over her shoulder, pistol in hand. We need to get away from here before more come. Samuel's breathing was rough, his shoulder throbbing. If we leave now, we lose the advantage. This is my land. I know every inch of it. She stepped down into the yard, eyes scanning the dark. And I know how men like this think. They'll regroup, maybe bring twice as many next time. They won't stop until they have those papers, or they're certain they're destroyed. Her voice held a conviction that told him she wasn't trying to scare him, she was telling him the truth. Samuel glanced toward the road, the emptiness stretching beyond. If we move, we'll have to move fast. and quiet. She nodded once. "I've done it before." The wind picked up, then rain from far off. It was almost enough to make the night feel clean again. But Samuel knew the rain wouldn't come, and even if it did, it wouldn't wash away the kind of trouble now tied to both their names. He slung the rifle over his good shoulder and looked at her. "Then we leave before first light." Margaret's hand tightened on the pistol grip. "We leave now." And for the first time since she'd stepped into his life, he didn't argue. The decision was made without another word. Samuel grabbed the canteen, a sack of dried beans, and the half-loaf of bread from the cupboard, while Margaret checked the revolver at her hip. The lantern on the table flickered as she cinched the strap of the document bag tight across her chest. Outside, the moon sat low, pale, and thin behind a thin veil of clouds. The air carried that tense stillness before a change in the wind, the kind that made even the night animals hold their breath. Samuel eased the door open, scanning the yard. The ground still bore the scuffed prints of the 3 men from earlier, and the broken fence post leaned like a warning. They moved fast, Samuel leading her toward the north fence line, away from the road cars men would expect them to take. His boots made almost no sound on the dry dirt, and Margaret kept pace without complaint. They skirted the shadow of the barn, its open door swaying slightly in the breeze, the hinges squealing just enough to set his teeth on edge. "Where are we going?" she whispered. "Old Arroyo," he said. 2 miles north. It'll hide our trail if anyone comes after us. And then we'll head west till we hit the river. Reeves will be moving slow with prisoners. If we're lucky, we'll cross paths before daylight." The word lucky hung between them like something they both knew they didn't have. They'd made it to the far side of the property when the faint sound of hooves reached Samuel's ears. He froze, holding up a hand. Margaret stopped beside him, her eyes scanning the darkness. The rhythm was wrong for a patrol. It was too fast, urgent. Back, he murmured, "Get low." They slipped behind a thicket of mesquite, the dry branches snagging at their clothes. The riders came into view moments later, 4 of them, no lanterns, only the glint of moonlight on metal. They passed less than 50 yards away, heading straight for the cabin. Margaret exhaled quietly. "They'll find it empty." "Which means they'll start looking," Samuel said. They waited until the sound faded, then moved again, keeping to the low ground. The arroyo's dry bed appeared as a pale ribbon ahead, its sides dropping steeply into shadow. Samuel slid down first, offering his good arm to help her. The earth was cool underfoot, the air damp with the faint smell of clay. They followed the curve of the arroyo for what felt like hours, the silence broken only by the crunch of gravel under their boots. Finally, Samuel stopped, leaning against the bank to catch his breath. His shoulder throbbed with every step the earlier hit from the stone, leaving it stiff and hot. Margaret noticed. "You're hurt." "I've been worse," he said, though the grit in his voice betrayed the pain. She dug into her bag and pulled out a strip of cloth, stepping close. "Let me wrap it. Won't do us any good if you can't lift that rifle." He considered arguing, then saw there was no point. She worked quickly, her hands steady, the fabric pulling snug around the muscle. For a moment, the closeness between them was a strange contrast to the cold, empty night. When she finished, she stepped back, eyes scanning the shadows along the bank. "We need to keep moving." They pressed on until the arroyo widened, opening into a shallow basin littered with rocks. Samuel was about to suggest they rest when a flicker of light caught his eye, a brief sharp flash like glass catching the moon. He crouched instantly, pulling her down beside him. Up there, he whispered, nodding toward the ridge. Margaret's hand went to her pistol. "Scouts." "Or someone who wants us to think they're scouts." The light came again this time, accompanied by the faint click of stone on stone. Samuel's eyes narrowed. "That's a signal." They stayed low, watching. 2 figures moved along the ridge, their shapes barely distinct against the sky. They didn't seem to be searching, they were watching, waiting. Margaret's voice was barely a breath. "You think their cars could be, or could be the same men who tried to burn us out." The figures shifted, and a 3rd man appeared behind them, leading a horse. Samuel's gut tightened. "They're setting up an ambush. They know we're heading for the river." Margaret's eyes flicked toward the dark expanse of the basin. "Then we don't give them the river." He almost smiled at the steel in her tone. "You have another path in mind, I know one," she said, "but it'll take us right through the canyon pass. Narrow, rocky, and easy to get trapped in." Samuel's gaze lingered on the ridge. "Better to risk a trap we can see than walk into one we can't." They moved quickly, hugging the arroyo wall until they found a narrow cut climbing toward the east. The slope was steep, forcing them to scramble in places, but it lifted them out of the basin and into a narrow trail between jagged rock faces. The moonlight barely reached here, leaving the path in deep shadow. Every sound seemed louder, the scuff of boots on stone, the distant crack of a shifting rock somewhere above. Samuel kept the rifle ready, his eyes sweeping the darkness ahead. Margaret stayed just behind him, her breathing controlled but quick. Halfway through the pass, a voice echoed off the walls, low and mocking. "Evening keen." They both froze. From the darkness ahead, a figure stepped into view, rifle resting casually across his shoulder. The narrow trail meant there was nowhere to move but forward or back. Samuel didn't recognize the man, but the way he stood said he wasn't alone. The glint of another barrel in the rocks above confirmed it. Margaret's fingers brushed the grip of her pistol. Samuel's voice was calm when he spoke. "You've got us at a disadvantage." The man smiled without warmth. "That's the idea." Samuel didn't lower the rifle, though he knew raising it would get them both shot before he could pull the trigger. The man blocking the pass stood easy weight on one leg, eyes sharp, as if he had all night to wait them out. Above in the jagged shadows of the rocks, the faint outline of a second rifleman shifted just enough to catch the moonlight on steel. Margaret took a half step forward, her voice cutting through the stillness. "If you're here for Carr's bounty, you're too late. He's already in federal custody." The man's smile was thin. "Carr's a piece on the board, lady. We're here for the rest of the game." His gaze slid to the bag slung across her shoulder. "That right there is worth more than his hide." Samuel kept his tone even. "You could have tried to take it back at the ranch. Why wait until now?" "Because now," the man said, tapping the barrel of his rifle against the rock beside him, "you've got nowhere to run." The narrow pass seemed to close in around them, the air cooling with the weight of stone on either side. Margaret's fingers curled on the grip of her pistol, but Samuel gave her a subtle shake of his head. This wasn't the place for a straight fight, not with high ground against them. "What's your plan?" Samuel asked. "You shoot us here, the papers get ruined in the dirt. You take us alive, we might talk. But you're still crossing Reeves' trail if you move east." The man chuckled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You let me worry about Reeves?" A small rock tumbled down from above, landing between Samuel's boots. It was deliberate, a reminder that the second rifle was trained on them. Samuel's jaw tightened. "If this is about money, we can make a deal." "I don't deal with dead men," the man said. "Drop the rifle, both of you step forward. Slow!" Margaret's eyes flicked to Samuel. He read the message there. If they gave up their weapons, they were done. Samuel shifted his weight, looking past the man toward a bend in the pass where the trail turned sharply to the right. In the dim light, he caught a flicker of movement, low, deliberate. It wasn't another gunman. The silhouette was too small. Margaret must have seen it too, because her voice changed. "You've made a mistake." The man raised a brow. "That's so?" "Yeah," she said. "You assumed you were the only one waiting." Before the man could react, a sharp whistle cut through the air from the bend in the trail. It was answered by the sound of hooves on stone, fast, reckless. A rider burst into view, ducking low in the saddle. Samuel recognized the wide-brimmed hat and straight posture of Marshal Reeves. The man in front of them swung his rifle toward the rider, but Samuel moved faster. He lunged forward, slamming his shoulder into the barrel, forcing it skyward. The shot cracked loud against the rock, sending echoes down the pass. Above, the second gunman fired the muzzle flash, bright in the dark, but Reeves was already off his horse, diving to the ground behind a boulder. Samuel drove the first man back, their boots grinding into the gravel. Margaret's pistol roared once, and the rifleman above cried out, tumbling out of sight. The man in front snarled, trying to wrench the rifle free, but Samuel's grip was iron. They struggled in the tight space until Reeves stepped in the butt of his revolver, smashing into the side of the man's head. He went down hard, the rifle clattering to the dirt. Reeves didn't waste time. "You two all right?" Fine Samuel said, though his shoulder burned. "How'd you find us?" "You lit up half the county tonight," Reeves replied, glancing at the bag on Margaret's shoulder. "And I figured Carr's friends wouldn't take the news sitting down." Margaret kept her pistol steady on the downed man. "He said he's after more than Carr." "What's that mean?" Reeves' eyes narrowed. "It means Carr's been paying into something bigger territory-wide. Men like him don't work alone. These two are just hired hands." The sound of shifting gravel above drew all their eyes upward. The second rifleman, wounded but not dead, scrambled along the ridge, trying to put distance between himself and the fight. Reeves raised his revolver, but Samuel stopped him. "Let him run. If he lives, he'll lead us to whoever sent them." Reeves considered, then lowered the gun. "We need to move. The pass isn't safe anymore, and if they had two here, there could be more waiting ahead." Margaret tightened the strap of her bag. "Then we get to the river and make sure these papers reach someone who can actually use them." Samuel picked up the dropped rifle, slinging it over his back as they started moving. The night air in the canyon was sharp, the smell of gunpowder lingering in the cold. Every step felt heavier, but the ground beneath them was still theirs for now. As they reached the bend where Reeves had ridden in, Samuel glanced over his shoulder. The man Reeves had knocked out was gone, a faint trail of blood leading into the rocks. Somewhere ahead, the other one was limping through the dark. And Samuel knew they weren't done. Someone else was still waiting for them to make a wrong move, and when they did, the price would be worse than a bullet. They moved quickly, the narrow pass forcing them into single file, with Reeves taking the lead, Samuel in the middle, and Margaret guarding the rear. The moonlight barely touched the trail, now the canyon walls rising steep on either side, hemming them in like a pair of closing jaws. Every few steps, Samuel glanced over his shoulder, half expecting to see the glint of steel or the flash of movement. The trail of blood they'd spotted earlier was long gone in the rocky ground, but the sense of being followed hadn't left him. Reeves slowed as they neared the mouth of the pass. "We're coming up on open ground," he said quietly. "If they've got men waiting, this is where they'll be." Margaret shifted the weight of the bag, her voice low but steady. "Then we don't give them a clear shot." Samuel's hand tightened on the rifle. "You thinking what I'm thinking, Smoke," she said. "But we don't have time to make it." Reeves glanced back. "Then we use the dark. The clouds are thick enough to cover us if we move now." They stepped out of the pass, the sudden openness of the dry plain ahead, almost blinding after the tight walls. The ground was uneven, pocked with tufts of scrub grass and shallow dips where water might have once pooled. Samuel kept his eyes sweeping the horizon, the tension in his neck sharp as wire. They were halfway across when a voice rang out from somewhere to the left. "Hold it right there." Figures emerged from behind a low ridge, 4 men this time, all armed. Their silhouettes moved with purpose, cutting off the route to the river. Reeves stopped, raising one hand slightly but keeping the other near his holster. "We're taking the bag," the lead man called. "Walk away, and you live." Margaret didn't slow. "You'll have to shoot me first." The man's tone shifted colder. "That can be arranged." Samuel stepped half in front of her rifle, angled just enough to make it clear he wasn't bluffing. "If you wanted us dead, you'd have fired already, so either you're scared of Reeves's badge, or whoever sent you told you to bring it back without bullet holes in the paper." Reeves didn't take his eyes off the men. "Which is it?" The lead man didn't answer. Instead, he lifted 2 fingers, and another rider appeared from the far side of the ridge. Even in the dim light, Samuel recognized the shape one of the ambushers from the canyon, the one they'd let go. Margaret's grip on the bag tightened. He led them straight to us. Samuel felt the weight of the choice pressing in. Open ground meant no cover, but turning back meant the pass, and that could be worse. "We split," he said to Reeves under his breath. "You take Margaret and circle north. I'll keep their eyes." Reeves shot him a look. "That's a fine way to get killed. Only if they're better shots than I am." Before Reeves could argue, Samuel moved, breaking toward a patch of scattered rocks to the right. Gunfire cracked almost instantly, bullets kicking up dirt at his heels. He dropped behind a boulder, firing back in short bursts, forcing them to spread their aim. Margaret and Reeves cut low across the plain, the bag pressed tight against her side. Samuel kept their heads down, shifting positions between shots to keep the attackers guessing. He could hear Reeves shouting something, but the wind carried it away. One of the men tried to flank him from the left. Samuel spotted the movement and fired the shot, striking close enough to send the man stumbling back with a curse. But another moved in from the right, and Samuel realized they were trying to pin him in place. A sharp whistle pierced the chaos, Margaret's voice. Samuel risked a glance and saw her and Reeves disappearing over a small rise out of immediate sight. He gritted his teeth, fired 2 more rounds to cover them, then ducked low and sprinted for the rise himself. Gunfire followed him, one shot tearing through the brim of his hat, another grazing his side with a burn that made his breath hitch. He dove over the ridge, landing hard in the dust beside Reeves and Margaret. "You all right, Reeves?" asked, pulling him up. "Not the worst I've had." Samuel said, though the warmth spreading under his shirt told him the graze was bleeding. Margaret glanced back toward the ridge. "They won't stop. Not until they have this." Reeves's expression hardened. "Then we make sure they don't." They moved again this time, staying low in the rolling dips of the land. The sound of the men behind them faded and returned in waves like the tide never fully gone. The river couldn't be far now, but Samuel knew the distance between here and there could be the difference between making it and being run down in the open. Every step felt heavier, the night pressing close around them, the sky lowering as if it too knew the chase wasn't done. Somewhere behind the men were regrouping, and when they came again, they'd come faster. Samuel tightened his grip on the rifle eyes fixed ahead. If the river was their only chance, they'd have to reach it before the next wave hit. The river's sound reached them before the water came into view, a low, constant rush that cut through the night like a promise. Samuel kept his eyes scanning the dips and rises ahead, every shadow a potential rifle barrel. Reeves moved slightly ahead, leading them through a shallow gully that funneled toward the riverbank. Margaret stayed close behind Samuel, the bag pressed tight against her ribs. They broke from the gully onto a stretch of pale sand, the river gleaming under a strip of moonlight. It wasn't wide here, but the current was swift, tugging at the banks with a restless pull. Reeves stopped scanning both directions. "If we cross, they'll see us in the open. If we follow it downstream, it'll take us closer to town, but it's slower." Samuel looked upriver. "What's that way, Rocks?" "Rapids." "No one will expect us to go through there," Reeves said. "But it's dangerous." Margaret's voice was firm. "So is waiting here." They angled upstream, staying low in the sand. The cool air off the water carried a dampness Samuel hadn't felt in months, almost enough to mask the faint iron tang of his own blood seeping from the graze at his side. He kept his breathing steady, forcing his mind to stay on the trail ahead and not on the shapes that might be gathering behind them. The first shot came from across the river, splintering the sand a foot from Reeves' boots. All three dropped instantly, scanning the far bank. Two men stood in the scrub on the opposite side, their outlines sharp against the pale light. One was already reloading. Down Samuel hissed, returning fire. His shot sparked off a rock near the shooter's feet, forcing him to step back. Reeves fired next, his bullet punching into the scrub and sending one of the men stumbling out of sight. Margaret kept low, crawling toward a cluster of driftwood piled against the bank. "They're not the only ones," she said, nodding upriver. Samuel followed her gaze. 3 more riders had appeared on their side of the river, coming fast along the sand, rifles ready. "Go!" Reeves barked, moving toward the rapids. "I'll cover!" Samuel grabbed Margaret's arm and pulled her with him. The roar of the water grew louder, the dark shapes of jagged rocks jutting from the current ahead. The bank narrowed until there was barely enough room for both of them to run side by side. Another shot tore past Samuel's ear, close enough that he felt the heat of it. Margaret glanced back. Reeves. The marshal was still firing, forcing the riders to fan out, but one had broken off, cutting a diagonal path straight toward them. Samuel saw the glint of his revolver just as the man fired. The shot went wide, but close enough to kick up sand at Margaret's feet. Samuel stopped, turned, and fired back. His bullet caught the man in the leg, sending him tumbling into the shallows. The others shouted their voices, carrying over the rush of the river. "Keep moving," Samuel urged, pushing Margaret ahead. They reached the edge of the rapids, the water churning white around the rocks. The far side was only 30 yards away, but the current was vicious, snarling around the black shapes of stone. Margaret's eyes swept the bank. "We'll never make it carrying the bag like this." "Give it here," Samuel said, slinging his rifle across his back and holding out his good arm. She hesitated for a heartbeat, then handed it over. He tied the strap tight across his chest. "If I go under, don't follow." "Not happening," she said. They stepped into the water together. The cold was a shock, biting through his boots and into his bones. The current shoved hard, dragging at their legs, but they moved sideways, pushing against it. Halfway across, a shout rang out behind them. One of the riders had reached the bank and was taking aim. Samuel turned his body, shielding Margaret, as the shot cracked. Pain lanced across his shoulder, the same one already bruised from the stone days before. He bit back a curse, forcing his legs to keep moving. Margaret's grip on his arm tightened, and she pulled him toward a flat rock jutting just above the surface. They scrambled onto it, water streaming from their clothes. Another shot hit the water near their feet. Margaret drew her pistol and fired back the flash, lighting her face in the darkness. The rider ducked, giving them the moment they needed. They plunged back into the water the far. Samuel felt the pull of the current trying to spin him off balance, but Margaret's hand never let go. They staggered onto the opposite shore, breathless, soaked, and shaking. Reeves was there a moment later, crossing at a higher point where the rocks gave him some cover. He looked them both over quickly. "You've still got it." Samuel patted the bag. "Never left my side." "Good," Reeves said, glancing back at the far bank. The riders were regrouping, but none seemed eager to try the rapids at night. Margaret dropped onto the sand, catching her breath. "They'll find another way around." Reeves nodded. "Which means we keep moving until there's no around left." Samuel looked upriver, where the current vanished into darkness between high cliffs. He didn't like the idea of being boxed in, but with men hunting them from every direction, the cliffs might be the only thing that kept them alive until morning. He met Margaret's gaze, and for the first time since they'd left the ranch, there was no question between them, only the knowledge that they'd keep going together, no matter how bad the next turn got.